So one thing I want to show you that I think will really help you to understand how these streams work and how this decorator pattern works in Java is how to actually implement this yourself. And we can do this really simply. And I think by seeing this, it really helped me when I had done this the first time to be able to understand how these streams are actually working and why am I passing in something into the constructor? Why can't I just read from this file and not have to do this file writer and print writer and remember all of these different types of streams? Why can't I just read from this file? And the answer to that is because we need to be able to combine different attributes. And it's really hard to see between this file reader and this print writer what the attributes are. Or the same thing on the reading side between this file reader and buffered reader. But if we were to create our own writer or reader, we made it so that it capitalized everything that it was going to read, for instance, then I think that makes it a little bit more clear here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create our own file reader, or we're going to create our own reader that's going to take a reader and it's going to capitalize everything that it reads. And we're going to plug this right into the chain. Just like we had wrapped our file reader in a buffered reader, we're going to wrap that buffered reader inside of our capitalization reader. So let's go ahead and declare this out and see how we want this to look, and then we'll implement this. So I'm going to create a capitalization reader, and we'll call this cap reader. And we haven't created this class yet. It doesn't exist. We're going to implement this class in a minute here. And we're going to make it so that this cap reader will basically wrap this buffered reader. In fact, it'll work with any type of reader. So we're going to pass in bReader here. And then instead of getting our line from bReader, we're going to get it from cap reader. And then instead of trying to close our checking for bReader, we're going to check cap reader, and then we are going to close our cap reader. So now let's go ahead and create this class. So I'm going to do create class here. And inside create class here, I'm going to make the superclass of this reader. I can click browse here to see that I want to use this reader, this Java IO reader. And I'll click finish. And you can see it's automatically tried to implement some of these methods for me, or override these methods. We're extending reader here. Now we could do this at a very basic level, but we'd have to implement this read method that takes in a character array as a buffer, and then an offset, and then a length. And that's a little bit more complicated than I want to get into here. So let's change this. Instead of extending reader, let's go ahead and just extend buffered reader, because it extends reader. So that should work. That is a type of reader, since we can just extend buffered reader instead. So we'll go ahead and add this constructor that's required here. So we're going to take in a reader in our constructor, and then we're just going to pass it to our parent class. Our buffered reader, that is our parent, will pass in whatever reader we get. But we're not doing anything special here. So let's go ahead and use this refactoring here. We're going to right click on capitalization reader. We're going to click source, and we're going to choose override / implement methods. And this is just a shortcut in Eclipse to be able to override methods very easily and see what you can override. So we're going to override some methods on buffered reader. We could have overridden some on reader, you can see here, but we want to override this read line, because this is the one that we really care about here. So for read line here, instead of just returning whatever is read from our parent class, we're going to store that in a variable. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's create a string called line, and we're going to call super.readline, which is going to call readline on our parent, which is our buffered reader. And then we're going to check to see if we got something. If line does not equal null, then we're just going to return our line to uppercase. Otherwise, we're just going to return null. So if we got null from the parent reader, then we'll just return null. But if we got something, we're going to uppercase it, and we're going to return that. And so what this is going to do is it's going to use our parent. It's going to use a buffered reader internally to do all the reading. So we don't have to re-implement all this reading logic. We're just adding something to the chain. So we are basically inserting ourselves into this pipeline and saying, okay, once we read the data, we're going to manipulate this data and then pass it back. And we're going to use the buffered reader here that we're extending to read this line. So let's look at this in the code that's using it, and it'll make a little bit more sense here. So now our code that's using it, we had created our capitalization reader. And our capitalization reader, we created a new one here, and we passed in our buffered reader, which had passed in our reader. So we've wrapped this 3 layers deep. We have our file reader that's able to read from a file. We've added this buffering layer over it that allows us to buffer the text from this file so we can read it in a stream. Instead of reading it 1 byte at a time, we're able to read the entire line. And then we've wrapped that in this ability to capitalize everything that comes out of the stream. So, and these are plug and play compatible. We could mix these up. We could create a lowercase reader and we could insert them at different layers, or we could use a compression reader that's able to read something that's compressed. So we could mix and match these together. This is kind of the idea here, is that we can keep on chaining them and none of these need to know what the other ones are doing. It's going to apply these operations in this specific order because remember, our capitalization reader, it's relying on a buffered reader. So it's going to call the buffered reader in order to read, and then that buffered reader is going to call the file reader in order to read. So then we're going to end up reading from this file, and every time we're calling read line here, if we look at our capitalization reader, how's this implemented? Well, we're overriding this read line, and instead of just reading the line, it's going to go ahead and read the line, but if the line's not null, it's going to uppercase the line and then return that result. So let's go into our hello world, and let's go ahead and run this and see what happens here. You can see there's no output to the console, but if we go into our temp directory here, you can see our output page now has everything capitalized. And if you remember, our input, our test.txt, does not. So we can see that by applying this reader, we're able to make it so that everything got capitalized. So you can think about a lot of different ways you could utilize this. You could create a reverse reader that's able to read things in reverse, some kind of proprietary compression or encryption that you're doing, all kinds of ways that you'd be able to extend this. And if you think about, let's say you wanted to write an encryption reader that was able to encrypt using some kind of encryption algorithm, if you didn't have this capability in Java, as hard as it is to have to do this kind of syntax where you wrap things together, if you didn't have that ability, if you wanted to write an encryption reader, you'd have to implement low-level I/O yourself. You'd have to re-implement all of this. Whereas now all you would have to do is just like we did with this capitalization reader and do your encryption here, or your decryption. You'd create a reader and a writer, and then you'd have all that functionality just implementing 1 or 2 methods.